Missing U-boats found. After realizing how vulnerable their open-top U-boat enclosures were in 1940, the Germans started building bunkers to protect U-boats, also known as submarines, from air attacks. One vessel, known as the Elbe II, housed 3 U-boats, the U-2505, U-3004, and U-350. The British bombed the bunker, causing the roof to partially collapse and trap the U-boats within. Attempts were made to scrap the boat during the 1940s and 50s, and parts were taken, but the endeavor proved too dangerous to be carried out entirely. The U-boats sat untouched until 1985, when they were rediscovered inside the Elbe II's destroyed bunker. During the 1990s, the German government decided that the vessel was dangerous and filled it with gravel and concrete. While the Elbe II still sits on the bank of the Elbe River at Volkenhofen, the area was turned into a parking lot, rendering it inaccessible. But at least we now know where the 3 missing U-boats ended up and where their final resting place is.
The Bigfoot of Vietnam. During the Vietnam War, soldiers saw a lot of terrifying things, some of them proven to be real, and some of them living at the edge of legend and fact. One of those bizarre nightmare monsters is a mysterious Bigfoot-like monster that lived in the jungle. It's known as Batatut, a creepy beast that skulks the forests of Vietnam and Laos and is rarely seen by humans. The Batatut stands about 6 feet, 2 meters tall. It's hairy and looks like an ape, and it's apparently highly aggressive. The first sightings of the Batatut came from the early 1900s, but then during the Vietnam War, because there was so much guerrilla warfare going on in the jungle, soldiers continuously found themselves bumping into what they thought was the Batatut. The most legendary encounter came in the early days of the war. A group of men from the 101st Airborne Division were taking a break in a mountainous region of the jungle when they felt something stalking them. At first, they believed it to be an ambush of the North Vietnamese soldiers. Instead, they witnessed a monster with red hair, dark eyes, and a gaping mouth. It looked at the soldiers, who thought it could have been an orangutan, and then vanished back into the jungle, making a ruckus as it went. The soldiers were shocked, not knowing if they'd witnessed a rare jungle primate or the legendary Batatut. It seems likely that it was just a bizarre gorilla-like creature, but perhaps there was some truth to the legend of the Batatut. We may never know for sure.
Tank in the swamp. In eastern Estonia, a tank was discovered in a swamp. It happened when a young boy noticed something weird sticking out of the mud. It looked like some kind of heavy machine, so the boy went back to his village, told his father, and a team of men got together to haul what turned out to be a massive Russian tank from World War II out of their local quagmire. The tank was in shockingly good condition. It was a T-34, likely captured by the Germans, painted to look like one of their own tanks, and then abandoned in the swamp when the Germans made their retreat. The T-34 was the best tank that the Soviets used during the war. It actually became more effective the longer the war lasted, because it was so easy to maintain and improve. About 80,000 of these tanks were created, and this particular one probably came from the battles fought at Narva in September of 1944, in which at least 100,000 men were killed. To keep the tank from falling back into enemy hands, the Germans dumped it in the swamp and left it there. The villagers pulled the tank from under about 12 feet of water. The ammunition was removed, the silt was washed off, and it was towed to the small war museum in the town of Gordienko. The museum then went so far as to restore the tank, completing the project in 2007 and putting the old machine on display. Heaven Can Wait. In 1944, a B-24 bomber called Heaven Can Wait was shot down off the Papua New Guinea coast while carrying 2nd Lieutenant Thomas V. Kelly Jr. during a mission to disrupt the Japanese shipping supply chains. His remains were never found, and his family was left to grapple with the lack of closure. In their attempts to come to terms with Kelly's demise, they had a tombstone made, bearing an etching of the plane and the words, "In loving memory." Some of Kelly's distant surviving relatives found information online about the B-24 bomber in 2013. They spent the next several years conducting further research, ultimately leading to an ocean floor search by oceanographers and archaeologists, which was covered in a 2018 New York Times article by Mike Ives. The long-missing B-24 bomber was found thanks to the nonprofit Project Recover, which works with the Defense POW/MIA accounting agency to find, identify, and return the remains of World War II personnel. Discovered in Hansa Bay, it's one of 5 U.S. aircraft that are believed to have gone down in the area during World War II. Since 1973, the remains of nearly 3,000 U.S. soldiers have been recovered. This may seem like a lot, but some 72,000 individuals remain unaccounted for, and only 26,000 are considered recoverable. While advancements in forensic science are helping in the effort to send fallen fighters home, experts are fighting against the clock as remains become more difficult to identify with time.
The Giant of Kandahar. As far as anyone knows, the Giant of Kandahar is classified by the US government. At least its existence is classified, along with a deadly encounter that the giant had with a group of United States soldiers operating in Afghanistan. This is what allegedly happened. In 2002, a squadron of soldiers went missing deep in the desert. A special ops task force was sent to find them. The task force eventually located a large cave in the middle of nowhere, with military equipment scattered about inside. As the team entered the cave, they were confronted by a humanoid giant 15 feet, 5 meters tall. It impaled one of the soldiers on a giant spear and then turned on the rest of the squadron. Luckily, these were special ops soldiers and weren't scared of a big burly monster. They eventually took the thing down, though it took them concentrating their M4 machine guns on it for nearly 30 seconds. That's a whole lot of firepower. With the giant dead, the soldiers airlifted it back to the base using a helicopter. Nobody knew where the giant came from or how it had been living alone inside a cave in the middle of nowhere. To this day, there's no official record of the giant or the incident. You can try to find out information about the beast, but the records are incomplete and spotty. It may just be another one of those stories that we'll find out about when the government decides to declassify the information they do have.
Australian dog tag. The identification tag, also known as a dog tag, that once belonged to an Australian man who fought valiantly in World War II, was just discovered, over 70 years after it went missing. The amazing discovery was made by Max Hazelhurst, a 13-year-old boy from the United Kingdom. The young boy was walking with his family, going for a leisurely hike, when he stumbled upon a shiny piece of metal poking out from underneath a rock. It looked like a dog collar, but when Max investigated further, he realized it was an important relic from the past. It had been lost since before he was born. On the dog tag was the name W.E. Wills. Max was very excited about the discovery and wanted to reunite the dog tag with its rightful owner. So, his mother helped him take to social media with the details of the dog tag. The story went viral, and before long, they had managed to identify the owner as one Private William Ernest Wills. William was born in Australia, but he was stationed as an airman in Britain during the fight of World War II. He actually worked at the airbase located just a mile from where the dog tag was discovered. From here, the story gets a bit sad. Max found out that after William had returned home from the war, he got in a car accident and died. He was only 43 years old. Still, Max was able to contact William's daughter, who was thrilled to receive her father's lost dog tag. Missing man recovered. The Navy cruiser USS Indianapolis was destroyed by a Japanese torpedo in July 1945, as what's been described by many as the Navy's worst ever maritime disaster. The vessel sank in less than an hour. Sailors and Marines perished in the actual sinking, as well as afterward from saltwater poisoning, dehydration, and shark attacks. In 2018, the wreck of the USS Indianapolis was discovered 18,044 feet below the water surface in the Philippine Sea. For a long time, the death toll was believed to number 880, and 316 were believed to have survived. But the Naval History and Heritage Command's Histories and Archives Division announced in 2018 that these figures were wrong, and that 879 people died, while 317 lived. Due to a clerical error, Navy radio technician Clarence William Donner was listed as being on the ship when he actually wasn't. Once researchers saw the error, it brought the total count of those aboard the ship down from 1,196 to 1,195, thereby solving the decades-old mystery of an unidentified missing man aboard the ship. Imagine if you were declared dead by mistake for being on a ship that sank in the war. You'd have no identity. You could start fresh with a brand new life. Would you? Tell me your ideas in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to American Eye if you haven't already for more intense videos.
The atomic Flatwoods monster. In 1952, an atomic monster descended on Flatwoods, West Virginia. It was seen once and only once by a group of eyewitnesses. According to History.com, it all happened when a pair of brothers were playing outside and witnessed a red light fall from the sky and crash onto a nearby farm. The youngsters, along with their mother, rushed to see what the light was. So did a few other people from the area. In total, 7 residents witnessed a monster that looked like Frankenstein's creation appear out of the trees. It had a green face, its body was blood red, and it was glowing as if nuclear. It was such a frightening story that it picked up traction all across the country. Sure, most of the witnesses were kids, but there were adults there too, making it a credible story. People in the town were terrified because it was 1952 and the Cold War was in full swing. With the advancement of nuclear bombs, people were terrified that what was witnessed in Flatwoods was an atomic monster. However, the thing was never seen again, and to this day, no explanation has ever been given for what the creature may have been.
Sunken subs. Ocean explorer Tim Taylor has discovered a total of 7 lost Navy submarines as part of his Lost 52 project, which is dedicated to locating the 52 United States submarines that vanished during World War II. He hasn't found them all yet, but he's getting there. One of his most momentous discoveries happened recently when he found the sunken R-12 submarine, a vessel that had 42 souls on board when it sank off the coast of the Florida Keys. The R-12 was a doomed Navy submarine that went down in June of 1943, killing all 42 men on board. To make matters worse, it sank during a training exercise. The Navy couldn't find the location of the sunken vessel, and so it remained hidden under the waves for 70 years. It was finally found by Tim Taylor and his team, who then got in contact with the relatives of those who had died that day on the submarine. What happened next is kind of amazing. Helen Baldwin's father died on the R-12. She was only 8 years old at the time. When Taylor finally got in touch with Baldwin to tell her that her father's remains had been discovered, she was 86 years old. Still, she went with Taylor and her 2 siblings on a boat into the middle of the Atlantic, where they held a memorial service for her father and the 42 men trapped inside the submarine, directly below their feet. The skeletons of the brave men still preserved inside that rusting vessel. Landing craft wreck located. In 1943, a British vessel called the Landing Craft Tank, LCT-326, disappeared with 14 crew members aboard. Military officials concluded that it probably encountered bad weather or hit a mine and sank somewhere off the Isle of Man. Marine scientists finally found the vessel last year off Bardsley Island in northern Wales. It was discovered 25 miles south of where experts had believed it was all along. New research revealed that the vessel's escort ship, HMS Cotillion, last witnessed LCT-326 in the area where it was recently found, despite official recordings claiming that it sank off the Isle of Man. The wreck was discovered broken in two, resting 300 feet below the water's surface. Although its identity was unconfirmed when the news made headlines, chances are good that it's LCT-326, as the vessel lies right in the path of the flotilla it was traveling with when it vanished. Measuring 190 feet long and 33 feet wide, the sunken vessel also matches the dimensions of the LCT-326. Designed to land armored vehicles, LCT-326 and others like it participated in amphibious operations like D-Day. The recently discovered wreck appears to have gone down in rough waters and likely broken half before plunging to its final resting place.
Chased by ghosts. In the 1970s, U.S. Army soldiers destroyed a series of tunnels in Germany to try and get rid of a ghost. That's right, there was a ghost allegedly haunting the people who lived by their base in the small town of Freihung, where there's been a major army installation since 1945. In the center of the town, there used to be an old castle where a noblewoman died many years ago. The castle was demolished and a hotel was built in its place. It was the hotel which the ghost haunted, and specifically the tunnels beneath the hotel. Locals call her the White Lady. In the 70s, this ghost wandered the streets at night, scaring drivers in their cars, and she was seen frequently meandering through the tunnels underneath a local hotel. In an attempt to rid themselves of the ghost, the town turned to the American troops and asked them to demolish the tunnels, which they did. However, the ghost refused to leave. Even after the tunnels were destroyed, the White Lady was still witnessed floating through the hotel at night and sometimes appearing in the dark streets outside. Perhaps if you visit today, you can still see her if you're very lucky.
Nazi massacre sites. Hundreds of disturbing items were recently found at a Nazi massacre site. The site is located in northwestern Germany, spread across 3 areas of the Amsberg Forest. It was here where members of the evil German Waffen-SS massacred approximately 208 laborers from both Poland and Russia in March of 1945, just before the war came to a dramatic halt. Local government officials were the ones to confirm the gruesome discoveries, which were made during archaeological excavations between 2018 and 2019. But just what kind of horrifying war relics did the archaeologists find? They discovered over 400 items, including pieces of clothes, old shoes, utensils used for cooking, and a Polish dictionary. Most of the items were found at the main massacre site, where 60 women, 1 child, and 10 men were murdered in cold blood after the victims were told that they were to be transported to a new prison. Instead of transporting them to prison, The Nazi soldiers had them take off their clothes on the side of the road, drop all their belongings, and then, well, you know the rest of that story. It was just like how the Nazis told their Jewish prisoners that they were going to have a group shower before executing them with Zyklon B, poisonous gas, from the shower heads. Even more grim are the cartridge cases found near the site of the slaughter. Some were found grouped together, while other cartridge cases were found dispersed throughout the forest, suggesting some of the prisoners were shot in the back as they tried to escape. War criminals' missing remains. Former Japanese Prime Minister Hideki Tojo was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to death in 1948 for his role in masterminding the attack on Pearl Harbor. He and 6 others were hanged. American officials handled the remains, keeping their whereabouts a secret to prevent the glorification of the executed men as martyrs by ultra-nationalists. Earlier this year, Nihon University professor Hiroki Takazawa announced that he had found the answer to this long-standing mystery through declassified U.S. military documents he examined in the U.S. National Archives in Washington, D.C. Takazawa spent several years poring over the documents before publicly disclosing his findings. Based on the evidence, he believes that Tojo's ashes were spread from a U.S. military aircraft over the Pacific Ocean, roughly 30 miles from the city of Yokohama. This is the first known time that details about Tojo's final resting place were found in official documents. His great-grandson, Hidetoshi Tojo, told the Associated Press that he was relieved by the information, and the unknown location of the remains had long been a source of embarrassment for the family.
Japanese soldiers and the mermaid. During World War II, Japanese soldiers were occupying the Hiei Islands in Indonesia. This was back in 1943, and these islands were fairly remote, which made for the perfect conditions for spotting something extraordinary. The islands are pretty small, covering an area of only about 500 square miles. Today, these islands are famous for their beautiful beaches. However, in 1943, they were the location of one of the most bizarre mermaid sightings in history. The Japanese soldiers were part of a surveillance team on a remote island. They began witnessing strange creatures in the water near their base. The monsters were unlike anything the soldiers had ever seen before. They had limbs like ordinary people, except their faces were twisted and ugly. They had fish mouths filled with sharp needle-like teeth. They also had skin that was pink like salmon, with spines protruding from their necks and shoulders and heads. Of course, these didn't look like traditional mermaids. They were more like disgusting frog people. The Japanese continued to see them playing in the lagoon, swimming at the beach, and hanging around near the water. Despite their efforts, they were never able to catch one. When they asked the local islanders what the creatures were, they called them orangutan, which translates roughly to human fish. Perhaps these creatures simply died out, or perhaps they never existed. Investigators will have to continue to hunt down any evidence of their existence until they find something concrete.
Crashed German plane. In 1989, a man was strolling through the woods near the Russian city of St. Petersburg. Back then, it was still called Leningrad. During this leisurely stroll, the man came across a ruined warplane from World War II. It was a German Focke-Wulf 190, the main fighter used by the German Luftwaffe. This was an airplane that terrorized all of Europe, raining down hell from above. This particular plane was built back in April of 1943 and actually came with a pretty interesting story. The pilot of the aircraft was Paul Rotz. Paul won several different air battles and survived 3 deadly crashes, but his flying career came to a halt when he crashed behind enemy lines. After Paul took off from the Siroskaja Air Base with a destructive 550-pound bomb to participate in the siege of Leningrad, arguably the bloodiest battle of World War II, his plane was damaged. He was shot down by an armored train with guns mounted to it and had to make an emergency landing in the forest. He tried to retreat back to friendly territory, but the Russians captured him as a prisoner of war. Paul then lived in a POW camp until 1949. He would never know that his final flight became a mystery and the aircraft wasn't found for over 40 years. After the plane's discovery, it was removed from the forest with a helicopter and restored in the United Kingdom. According to the War History Online, it is now the only working FW-190 war fighter anywhere in the world. USS Greyback. 52 U.S. submarines were reported missing during World War II. At least a handful of them have been found as part of an initiative called the Lost 52 Project. In 2019, the organization announced its 7th discovery of a lost submarine, the USS Greyback. Found 1,427 feet underwater off the Okinawa coast, it's the first U.S. submarine to be discovered in Japanese waters. After discovering a document error in the longitudinal calculation for where the USS Greyback sank, the Lost 52 team figured out the correct location. Using advanced technology, including sophisticated robotics, they found the wreck 100 miles from where the original historical record specifies. The USS Greyback sank 14 ships and menaced and disrupted many others throughout the war. It was imperative in the Allies' success of the Pacific Campaign at Guadalcanal. At the tail end of its career as one of the most successful World War II submarines, the vessel disappeared during its last mission in 1944 while en route to the East China Sea. A month after leaving from the patrol mission, the crew communicated that the sub only had 2 torpedoes left. It was ordered home, but word spread shortly thereafter that it was damaged by enemy aircraft. All communication ceased from there, leaving families of lost crew members without closure until the USS Greyback's rediscovery 75 years later.
The Hounds of World War I. During the Battle of Mons in World War I, with the British troops facing off against German soldiers in August of 1914, something strange happened. The British soldiers sustained heavy casualties because of the fighting, but they managed to push the Germans back. But the Germans weren't the only thing the British Army had to fear. When a group of men went to patrol no man's land, the vast and barren area between the two sides of the fighting, they vanished. When their bodies were recovered several days later, teeth marks were discovered on their throats as if they'd been ripped apart by a massive wolf. Then during the night, the soldiers began hearing howling coming from the darkness. From then on, almost every soldier that went into no man's land at night vanished and were found with their throats ripped out. Some soldiers witnessed a huge gray beast like a werewolf wandering not far from the trenches, though nobody actually saw the creature, and eventually it kinda just disappeared. Nobody exactly knows what the Hound of Mons was. It could have been an extremely hungry wolf, a vicious wolf pack, or, according to Canadian veteran F.J. Newhouse, a hound from hell created by the German scientist Dr. Gottlieb Hochmüller after switching a wolf's brain with the mind of a madman and setting it loose on British soldiers. Do you think that's even possible? I don't, but then again, who knows for sure?
Soldiers' remains. The body of a soldier was discovered at the site of a ruined warship that was sunk in Cambodia's Mekong River in the Kampong Cham province back in the 1970s. A brutal civil war took place here that killed nearly half the Cambodian population. The shipwreck was discovered filled with unexploded ordnance, which meant the munitions on board needed to immediately be recovered to keep the river safe. The clearance team went in to remove the bombs, and when they did, they identified the skeleton of a dead soldier, who they say was most likely a guard on the ship and unfortunate enough to be there when it was destroyed. The authorities released the soldier's name, saying anyone who lost someone by that name in the war should collect his bones and give him a proper burial. As for the unexploded stuff, the divers found somewhere around 722 pieces of ammunition, both 60mm and 105mm. They also found almost 55,000 handgun and machine gun bullets, along with around 300 tons of explosives. Palm Beach rubber bales. Authorities were stumped last year when large blocks of material similar to rubber cement began washing ashore in Palm Beach, Florida. Volunteers from the non-profit Friends of Palm Beach were the first to spot the strange objects. For several weeks, beachgoers and snorkelers reportedly spotted the blocks, but failed in their efforts to remove any from the water before they washed away. Finally, in the wake of Tropical Storm Isaiah, 3 of the blocks washed ashore and were successfully retrieved. In the coming weeks, 3 more were collected. On the inside, they were solid, with thin rubber layers and a honeycomb-like pattern. The bizarre objects were bales of natural rubber latex, according to Jerry McCall of the R.D. Abbott Co. rubber supplier, who spoke with the Palm Beach Post. He further explained that the blocks were of a style characteristic of South American manufacturers, but nobody could say with certainty when or where these were made. A study published earlier this year suggests that the blocks dated back to World War II, and that they come from the same shipwreck that caused rubber bales to appear on the Brazilian coastline. The vessel in question is the Rio Grande, a German ship that U.S. forces destroyed near the country in 1944. It would make sense for the blocks to get caught in the Gulf Stream and make their way to Florida. The bales from both Brazil and Florida are similar in appearance, but more research is necessary to confirm their source. The explanation is plausible, especially considering that rubber was in high demand during World War II, and is something militaries would have been transporting in their ships. Although the Rio Grande rests 3 miles below the water's surface, it's possible that metal-eating bacteria corroded the ship and released the bales from within. This is just one possible way they could have reached the shore after being submerged for over 70 years. It's also possible that someone illegally salvaged metal from the Rio Grande, causing the blocks to surface. Whatever its source, it's just weird to see strange rubber cubes from World War II washing up on shore, don't you think?
Giant sea monster. In 1973, U.S. soldiers in Laos killed and captured a very real monster. It wasn't a mythical mermaid or a hound from hell. It was a mythical serpent known to the locals as the Queen of the Naga. The slippery beast was pulled out of the Mekong River and measured at over 24 feet, 7 meters long. It took over 24 men to hold the fish up, angering the locals because they killed their sacred river monster. However, this story seems more likely to be a bit of a fabrication. It's based on the photograph of a group of servicemen who discovered an oarfish stranded on the beach in 1996 near their base in San Diego. The picture is real, the oarfish is real, and it really is a giant mythical sea serpent. But the picture of the soldiers holding it up has been miscaptioned all over the internet. Still, the oarfish is nothing short of legendary. In many Asian countries, they believe an oarfish being found on the shore is an omen of something terrible and destructive to come.
Reclaimed art. A piece of artwork stolen by the Nazis has been recovered by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The painting, according to CNN, has been sitting in a New York museum for decades, but how it got there in the first place isn't very pretty. The Nazis stole the piece of artwork from a Jewish family that managed to flee Germany just before the beginnings of the war. The painting is called Winter, and it was painted by Impressionist Gary Melchers. The painting was purchased directly from the artist in the year 1900 while on display at the Great Berlin Art Exhibition. The purchaser died in 1920, with his art collection being passed down to his daughter in 1942. His daughter, Felicia, along with her husband, Hans, were persecuted for being Jewish because the newspaper published by their press company was critical of the Nazi political party. The family was forced to flee Germany in 1933, with the German government stealing their art collection, which had about 200 pieces in it. At this point, it's important to remember that the Nazi regime was around before the war technically started. They had been operating a fairly successful campaign of terror throughout the 1930s. The Nazis then auctioned off the family's artwork to various buyers. They did the same thing with thousands of Jewish families throughout the 30s and 40s. There's actually a database of looted artifacts that includes over 25,000 objects. Experts say the real number is probably much higher. Fast forward to now, the FBI finally identified the Winter painting as a stolen piece of art and will be transported back into the hands of its rightful owners, the descendants of Hans and Felicia. Looted treasure. The discovery of a German World War II-era ship last year made headlines for its potential to solve an age-old mystery surrounding looted treasure. One of the war's most famous mysteries is the whereabouts of a collection of valuables the Nazis took from the Amber Room, a gilded chamber that was once a fixture of the Tsar's palace. The trove was last seen in the modern-day Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, which was a Baltic port city known as Königsberg during the war. It departed the port in 1945 on the Karlsruhe steamer, which was sunk off the Polish coast by Soviet aircraft. Loaded down with heavy cargo and 1,083 passengers, the ship had left in a hurry as part of a massive sea evacuation called Operation Hannibal, which relocated over 1 million German troops and civilians amid the Soviet advancement into East Prussia toward the war's end. Last October, Polish divers claimed that they found the wreck. It contains military vehicles, porcelain, and crates filled with unknown contents, according to diver Tomasz Stachura. Whether these crates contain the missing Amber Room treasures remains to be seen, but the prospect of finally finding the vanished collection is nothing short of intriguing.
Yeti footprints. Members of the army in India recently claimed that they found footprints of the Yeti monster. In a rather unusual move, the army tweeted to roughly 6 million followers that it had identified the very real footprints of the mythical Yeti monster. The post was accompanied with pictures of the prints found near the Makalu base camp high up in the Himalayas. As you can probably imagine, the public ridiculed the army mercilessly. The Yeti is an abominable snowman said to live in the Himalayas and Siberia, though there hasn't been much more concrete evidence of its existence. Actually, nothing scientific proves its existence at all. Online, people mocked the army, asking them if maybe it was one of the giants from Game of Thrones instead of the Yeti, obviously ridiculing them. Nobody knows what the prints were or if they were even animal prints at all. They could have just been indents in the snow. But without further evidence, the social media post was pure speculation.
The first sunken battleship. A team of researchers funded by a billionaire named Paul Allen recently found the wreckage of the very first Japanese battleship that was successfully sunk by the United States Navy during World War II. The ship was part of the Japanese Imperial Navy, named Hiei. It was discovered upside down, sitting on the floor of the sea, roughly 3,000 feet below its surface. It had been there for almost 80 years, ever since it was destroyed near the Solomon Islands. It was November of 1942, and the U.S. Navy was in a furious battle with the Japanese. The Hiei was in close combat with the heavy cruiser, USS San Francisco. It was the middle of the night. Then, sometime during the battle, the U.S. destroyer Laffey sailed past the Hiei with about 20 feet between them, and the two ships fired at each other. The Laffey sank, and in the morning, the Hiei was sailing away with heavy damage. But the Americans didn't want the ship to get away. They chased it with dive bombers and a B-57, and the aircrafts dropped bombs on the Hiei until it sank. 188 crew members died. Even though the ship was discovered and documented, there have been no attempts to raise it from the bottom of the ocean. It's basically a fish house at this point. Family letters returned. Websites like Ancestry.com are proving instrumental in reuniting long-lost family members, as well as helping people recover missing family heirlooms. While renovating a Toronto home over 10 years ago, a contractor named Dave Smart discovered a box with letters dating back to World War II behind a basement furnace. Written between 1939 and 1941, they were exchanged between a husband and wife named Arthur Robert Whitley and Amy Florence Gorman. After holding on to the letters for several years and embarking on his own search for surviving family members of the pair, Smart sought the help of Parliament member John Brassard. The local community also joined in the search and helped to uncover important details about the correspondence. Their efforts led them to Scott Gorman, a relative of Amy Florence Gorman, who they contacted through Ancestry.com. Gorman recognized Amy's name in a news story about the letters, but he wanted to make sure that the article was speaking about his relative and not someone with the same name. He consulted his aunt, who corroborated details of the story from memory. She confirmed the connection and even provided a photograph of Amy Gorman's father. Scott Gorman's efforts to document his family's history on the website played a major role in finding a rightful owner for the letters. Speaking with Barry today, he said he planned to read through them and hopefully upload them so that they are available for others to read.
Zombie attack. There appears to be a clip floating around on the internet nowadays that shows what is unmistakably a zombie attacking a soldier. The footage was taken using a night vision camera from a police helicopter, which apparently witnessed a man being chased and then ripped apart. The helicopter was monitoring a soldier who was running for his life from a group of rabid zombies. Once the zombies caught up to him, they shoved him to the ground and ripped him limb from limb. Do we know if it's real? No, we don't. It could be a well-edited fraud, or it could be something that should have everyone on the planet fearing for their lives. It's unclear when exactly this footage was taken or if it's legitimate, but the implication that Russia had a close call with a zombie plague is quite frankly terrifying.
Glenn Miller's disappearance. One afternoon in December 1944, a plane carrying big band leader Glenn Miller disappeared while flying over the English Channel. The aircraft was carrying the celebrity from England to France after he gave up his career to serve in the military and entertain soldiers overseas. The plane and Miller's fate are one of the war's most intriguing mysteries. In 2014, researcher Dennis Sprague claimed that he had gotten to the bottom of the tragedy. He examined long overlooked military records and concluded that the plane Miller was traveling on crashed after fuel intake froze, causing the engine to stop. This happened while the aircraft was flying low due to poor visibility, giving the pilot a mere 8 seconds to react before hitting the water. Colorado Public Radio reported that Sprague believes the lightweight plane disintegrated upon impact and that those aboard died instantly. Miller was in his 30s when he joined the Army and became a major, putting on musical performances in Europe to boost soldiers' morale. He also participated in an anti-propaganda effort, broadcasting in German to combat the Nazis' brainwash tactics. This work caused some to believe that Miller was a spy for the Allied forces and that he was perhaps assassinated. But Sprague clarified that the anti-propaganda campaign is much different than acting as a clandestine spy. Another theory suggests that the plane was shot down in an instance of friendly fire. Evidence that surfaced during the 1980s showed that 138 Allied planes dropped their bombs into the English Channel while returning from an aborted bombing mission, indicating that one of the explosives may have hit Miller's plane. But the timing of Miller's flight and the returning military aircrafts just doesn't match up. Records show that the plane was experiencing icing problems, and that these details were not shared with the public, making this the most probable explanation. If Sprague's findings are correct, it means that Miller's death was far less shrouded in conspiracy than many seem to want to believe. Ammunition in the vegetable patch. Scott Thomas was working in the vegetable garden when he noticed something a little strange hiding in the soil. Scott was actually showing off his trench skills as part of an assessment at the Reed Business School, where he was studying to be a horticulture operative. While rooting around in the soil, Scott came across a small collection of rifle ammunition from the Second World War. But just how could bullets from ancient rifles have gotten lost in the college garden? It's believed that American soldiers left the bullets behind, as they had actually been using the area as a shooting range during the war. The bullets were disposed of properly, and Scott was allowed to do his assessment later in the day, in another patch of soil, where there wasn't any live ammunition. Thanks for watching. Would you keep ammo you found in the vegetable patch? Which discovery do you think would be the coolest to find? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to hit the subscribe button for more amazing videos. I'll see you on the next one.